Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And who the hell is Sophie Wessex?
The question you've all been asking. We have had so many comments and reviews and messages from people saying that we should talk more about Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex. And we thought, let's just bang it all into one episode with any and all of the interesting details we could find out about either of these people and be done with it.
And we honestly thought it was going to be so incredibly boring. But it hasn't been.
A lot of this comes from a book called Sophie's Kiss, which is, as far as we can tell, the only book that's been written about Sophie and Edward. They are not popular with biographers or anyone really. But this book is written by Garth Gibbs, who was a journalist with The Mirror. He has since died. And Sean Smith, a celebrity biographer who has also written biographies of the likes of Cheryl Cole and Chalisa.
Wow.
Which is a pretty good company to be in.
Well, I know what I'm reading next after the Air affair.
But it gave us some great insight into Sophie's life, Edward's life, their life together. It was written before they got married, so it doesn't cover their marriage, but it seems like most of the interesting stuff related to Sophie and Edward happened before they got married and very shortly after their marriage, and then they really shut their shit down and there's just nothing coming out of there. So let's wind back the clock.
Tell me about a young Sophie.
As a child, Sophie was like the quintessential Enid Blyton heroine of the classic Mallory Towers books. Tom, what are the classic Mallory Towers books? I have never read these.
They are classics of the girls' boarding school genre.
Is that one of your favourites, Tom?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I do think it's funny, though, how often we hear about Enid Blyton as a real hallmark for the royals. Like, we recently heard about how Kate wanted an Enid Blyton childhood for her kids, and it just seems like so ingrained in the British DNA as the ideal of childhood.
If you're white. If you're a white British person.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Enid Blyton was a massive racist. So.
Oh, yeah, no. Not endorsing it at all. Just giving some background for people who maybe don't know who Enid Blyton is.
Oh, yeah, and the royals just absolutely seem to love her.
Sophie's dad was a teacher. Her mother was a secretary for an estate agent, but she also once danced with Prince Philip at a society ball.
Oh my god.
In reading about Sophie, we heard a good bit that she, really rose her way up the ranks. She wasn't part of the aristocracy. She was a middle-class girl. But, it's funny that when they talk about, like, her great hardship, according to this book, was that she never had a pony, unlike the rest of her friends, so she was stuck on a lower social rung.
And actually, that's something that really affected her later life, because she's quoted in this book as telling someone that she has what's known as an electric bottom, which is when she sits on a horse, the horse just rides away. And it makes it very difficult for her to go on rides.
With her electric bottom?
With her electric bottom. She went to school at Dulwich Prep, where she called her headmaster, Robin Peverett, Mr. Pervert.
The man we all call, Tits Pervert. Mr. Tits Pervert. Mr. Tits Pervert. Fitzherbert. Because that is his name.
It's so funny.
I love that. I was quite endeared to Sophie at that point.
I felt like you would be really endeared by this story about when Sophie was 10 years old. She read a book about witches called The Ogre Downstairs and decided to form a coven at school. Each week, so there was 4 girls, and each week one of the 4 would be chief witch and would issue instructions or dares, such as being allowed only to wear a certain colour or clothing. Sophie's dare was that they had to go all day without touching any metal, and they even had to eat their soup without using a spoon.
I feel like the school must have been pretty lenient if they let these kids get away with just, like, these mad ideas.
Witchcraft.
It's disgusting.
How much of this witchcraft has she carried through to adulthood? That's what I want to know.
Well, she certainly seems to be able to put a spell on the boys. We got a lot of details about how she was boy crazy and her discovery of the opposite sex.
I was surprised by how many boyfriends she had. I'm not trying to slut shame her here, but they really go into a lot of detail about virtually everyone she's ever slept with. So let's start with the first kiss. With a suntanned hunk. We just get a lot of details about how suntanned he is. And she kissed him after leaving him a series of notes saying things like, meet me by the flower beds or meet me by the gym, where they would smooch. Her first boyfriend was passionate about the theatre, a quality she finds irresistible in her men, according to the authors of this book.
That's not a quality you often hear about being irresistible. Is it?
But anyway, she was apparently very popular with boys. One of my favourite quotes was they talked to an old friend of hers who recalls how in their teens their group swapped lovers manically. Which conjures all kinds of images. My favourite image of her youth is when she was 17 at her brother's 21st and she was flirting outrageously, drinking gin and tonic and wearing a black trilby while puffing away on her favourite Benson and Hedges cigarettes.
This is actually disturbingly similar to my own 17-year-old self.
They also say that she knew all the best places for a little privacy with her lovers.
She learnt that when she was leaving the notes for the flower beds for the kissing.
The best spot was driving up a dirt track and parking your car and proceeding with your affairs. She also apparently had sex with her ski instructor in a tent, which they paid £4 a night for. And then she ended up following him to Australia, although they broke up shortly afterwards.
Dickmatised? Is that the word?
You can't say that word. She's really friendly, though, with all of her exes. Like, her ex-boyfriend, one of her ex-boyfriends is her dentist, still.
And she's got really good teeth.
She does have very nice teeth. Unusual for a Brit.
Excuse me. So she's clearly very independent, and the book says that it could be said that being the Queen's son's girlfriend for 3.5 years without marrying him is the ultimate gesture for a modern young woman. Girl power! I feel like it's maybe more indicative of her interest in social climbing.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, they have a couple of quotes in a row. One from an ex-boyfriend who says Sophie was more interested in friends who had titles. She was always going on about places she'd been to and parties in the country. That's the kind of lifestyle she always wanted. And then another friend saying she was always impressed by titles. You would often hear her talking about these people. They sounded like complete tossers, but they obviously impressed her. She was blinded by that sort of thing.
She certainly got what she wanted.
Yeah, and then some. She ended up working, though, in public relations. But questions remain over whether or not she did the PR for Mr. Blobby. Tom, who's Mr. Blobby? You gotta give the listeners a primer.
Okay, Mr. Blobby, you'll hear him talked about as though he's a real person, but he's not. He's like an inflated pink man with yellow spots. I mean, man, I don't think he's human, but he's the invention of Noel Edmonds, and he had his own theme park, which was, I think, almost completed or never opened or something, so it was just left to become overgrown, and there's like Mr. Blobby toilets and Mr. Blobby like everything, but no one's ever able to go there.
No one's ever able to use Mr. Blobby's toilet.
No. But his big thing was causing chaos. And
so he need a good PR whiz on his side.
Exactly, yeah. But it's just not clear from this book because...
He's a children's entertainer, right?
Yeah, but I think he entertained adults as well. I don't think he was... there's like a period of time in English TV, British TV, where adults were laughing at things which now we would really only consider appropriate for children.
In the UK.
Yeah.
When you say he's an inflated pink man, it makes him sound like Prince Andrew, just like someone with an inflated sense of self. Anyway, the authors say Sophie did a day a week on the Noel Edmonds Garden Party show, which is where Mr. Blobby originated. That name is so funny to me. But it's not strictly true that she did the PR for Mr. Blobby.
But then later in the book, they quote a colleague who says she often took calls from journalists who would be talking to her about Mr. Blobby and then ended up asking her when she was getting married. So they would use talking about Mr. Blobby as a way to trick her into giving them details about her relationship. Why were they talking to her about Mr. Blobby in the first place if she wasn't responsible for his PR?
I would love to know what any journalist would ask about Mr. Blobby.
I don't think you realise what a big deal Blobby was.
Blobby, Blobby, Blobby!
Okay, Tom, who the fuck is Prince Edward?
Well, Edward could not be further from a conventional royal prince, according to this book. He is neither playboy nor prude, nor is he some sort of ultimate hooray Henry figure. He is a man of sensitivity, ambition, and inner strength. Now, inner strength is something that apparently the Queen has identified in Sophie, which she never saw in Diana or Fergie. So I think inner strength is what you say about someone when maybe there's not a lot else to say about them.
We also learned that he is Prince Philip's favourite son, although Anne is obviously his favourite child overall. And the reason for this is that although he's delicate, he's not weedy, and he's really into shooting.
Great qualities in a child.
Also, Princess Anne's nickname for him is definitely a racist slur.
Yeah, that was really weird. I don't understand that at all, where did that come from?
She apparently calls him Nignog. I have no idea where this came from. I do not understand why this family have such a penchant for racist nicknames for people.
Yeah.
There's no explanation given for why she calls him that, by the way, in the book.
I mean, what could the explanation be?
But we get some early indications of what a nightmare Prince Edward is. So in school, when he's in sixth form, at which you're like 17 or 18 years old, he's at Gordonstone, by the way, where you might know from Prince Charles being miserable there in The Crown. Edward complains to the laundry at school that his shirts were not folded well enough.
A really...
prick.
Yeah, a total prick.
And he was also a fucking narc. They say that he reported schoolmates that he saw smoking and drinking, which I'm sure made him very popular.
What I think is so funny is, like, if he'd known Sophie when they were in school, they would, like, not have got on at all. You would never be like, oh, they'll get married, because he would have, like, handed her up to the teachers.
I know, we hear so much about how, like, she was raiding the drinks cabinet from when she started public school, where you're, like, 13 years old.
Yeah.
So maybe they wouldn't have got along very well when they were kids. But anyway, I was interested that Prince Edward set a record in the royal family with his school results.
He got, like, 2 C's and 2 D's at A-level, which, I mean, given he then went on to Cambridge University, like, you don't go to Cambridge University with those grades.
I didn't get into Cambridge University and I got much better grades than he did. But this prompted a big controversy that it was a very obvious example of favouritism. And after all that, he graduated with a 2-2. Which is the same as Charles, which Edward was annoyed about because he wanted to do better than Charles.
Well, ever since I knew we were going to be talking about Edward, I've just had sex on the brain, mate. So please, give me some details.
When Edward was at Cambridge in second year, he got glandular fever, which caused a bit of a scandal because it was said that he had got the snogging disease. Very funny. I mean, not very funny if you've glandular fever. I'm sure it's horrible, but, you know, great rumour to have for the not playboy Prince Edward. He lost his virginity. This is like a scene out of a porno, the way they describe this.
Yeah.
He lost his virginity to a maid at Balmoral when he was 18 and she was 21. And she snuck into his room and had her way with him. And then went and told everyone on the staff, and he got upset about that. But isn't that so porny? Like,
yeah.
Reading it, it's like, oh, and she's in a French maid's costume. Like,
yeah. I mean, his general way with women seems very different from that. Apparently, he stalked a girl who had rejected him, calling and writing to her frequently until she gave in. And the authors described him as pursuing her like a demented moth to a flame. Have you ever heard sexier imagery about the romantic lead?
I mean, he had quite an unusual type in women. His type was described as girls with shortish hair who you wouldn't particularly look twice at in the street, who were not stunning and butch. He reportedly also, this is maybe my favourite detail from the book, he reportedly keeps a collection of teddy bears in his bedroom. This man is 60, or nearly 60, right?
So weird.
He had a lot of interesting showmances. Many of his girlfriends had boyfriends at the time that he was seen with them, such as Ulrika Johnson, who I guess is the most high-profile person he was connected to, who was happy to be photographed with him, but had a boyfriend at the time, and this was apparently quite common with the women Edward was seen with. The authors of the book describe his attitude to his true lovers as smuggling, such as when he smuggled Sophie into Sandringham by a side door.
So he kind of treats them like they're contraband, and that the press are the customs officers.
According to this book, yes.
That's a certain kind of role play.
We'll get back to the smuggling in a moment when we address the gay rumours. But first, we could talk a little bit about Edward's career pre-Sophie.
Well, as a royal, I expect he had a pretty illustrious military career.
He spent all of 12 weeks training as a Marine before he resigned.
Apparently, one factor in his resignation was that he was getting ready and looking in the mirror and putting his beret on or whatever, and he asked a passing sergeant how he looked, who replied, "Just lovely," before sweeping him into his arms and giving him a big kiss.
And he just...
That was enough. He was done.
Yeah, I mean, so much for, royal duty and service. 12 weeks and he was out. The New York Post called him the Weeping Wimp of Windsor, which is just some great alliteration. Later that year, then, members of the Yankee Company 45 Commando wore t-shirts at a royal tournament that read, "You can turn a frog into a prince, but you can't turn a prince into a Marine." And also, "I have gone where princes fear to tread."
So, again, another quite embarrassing thing for the royal family.
So he wasn't interested in the military, so he decided to pursue his true love, the theatre.
When he was 24, so this was after the military, he wanted to be an actor.
Yes, and he did a lot of acting in school and in college, and there were claims that he had posters of himself on the walls of his room in Buckingham Palace, including one of him playing a wrestler called the Sandringham Slammer.
I would love to see that.
Oh my god, what I would give. But...
Do you think it was that poster that just infatuated the maid?
But, if you can believe this, Buckingham Palace made a statement about this, denying that he had posters of himself on the walls. What happened to never complain, never explain? They can make a statement about Edward having posters of himself on his wall,
but they never stood up and defended Meghan against all the racist abuse she was getting? You have a major disagreement with Edward, though, don't you?
I mean, if you know anything about Edward's life, you know that he did some work with Andrew Lloyd Webber, so it may not be a surprise to you to learn that his favourite musical is not Phantom,
which he does love,
but Cats.
Meow.
And just as an aside, his favourite band is ABBA.
He kind of fancied himself apparently a bit of a DJ, and he made his friends at Windsor join Eddie's nightclub in his drawing room, which is so funny. Just Eddie's nightclub where you listen to the Cats soundtrack cast recording.
Where he plays ABBA and Boney M. What's Eddie's SoundCloud? He was the first of the Queen's children to get a real job as a member of Andrew Lloyd Webber's really useful theatre company.
And he was also the first to get sacked for being part of a group that was attempting a coup against Andrew Lloyd Webber.
I do think it's interesting that he is described as being more of a fanboy around the actresses than trying to sleep with them. So it's noted that he would often gush over their performances and kind of wait by the stage door rather than try to get into their dressing room. Also, possibly of interest to people is that he loves Judy Garland.
Which I think is a great point for us to start talking about the gay rumours, which get their own entire chapter in this book.
Yeah, and it almost reads like a checklist of every possible stereotypic trait about gay men. And these kind of stereotypes recur throughout, like I was just saying about how he's a fan of Judy Garland, or that his type is a particularly butch woman. And I feel like we should know that these kinds of stereotypes have often been used as a weapon for maintaining a very toxic masculinity in the 1990s, and to some extent today as well. Homophobia was a really critical ingredient in the definition of manhood.
The authors frequently peddle this idea of a very ugly homophobic idea that being gay disqualifies you from being a real man. And homophobia and sexism really go hand in hand here, because they're saying that by expressing an interest in something feminine, like musical, I mean, I'm saying feminine in inverted commas here, in feminine musicals or clothing, Edward is stepping outside the boundaries of traditional masculinity, and they come in as the gender police to beat him back into line.
It's obviously really harmful to weaponize these kinds of traits against men, and it is that kind of stereotyping that perpetuates this very narrow-minded image, very limited image of LGBT people, which can in turn lead to discrimination or in some cases even violence against gay men. So we are cognizant of that, but at the same time it is funny to me how neatly this ties in to the most incredibly dated stereotype of a gay man.
Yeah, they go through the kind of supposed evidence as to whether or not he's gay, because also there's no possibility of him being anything other than either gay or straight in this. So the News of the World published some second-hand claims back in 1986, but we have no details on what they were. We couldn't find them. Then at Cambridge there was allegedly a compromising photo of Edward that was doing the rounds, but it's never surfaced.
Yeah, and the authors don't say what the photo showed or anything like that. There is this suggestion that when he left the Marines, he left at the same time as a male chum, which provoked some more rumours. And like we were saying, that the authors used this kind of homophobic code that it showed that Edward was not manly enough for this particular occupation.
In addition, he had these nicknames, so they say, amongst his theatre lovey friends that included Docklands Doris, Mavis, and Barbara, as in Barbara Windsor.
Who's Barbara Windsor?
Barbara Windsor was the star, well, one of the stars of the Carry On films, in which she often got her boobs out.
Matron, take them away!
And you may also know her as Peggy Mitchell from EastEnders.
You dirty rotten bitch! Get out of my pub right now!
As well as the nicknames, the authors say Edward wears Elton John style blousey blue silk jackets with carefully cut jeans.
I love these carefully cut jeans. I have no idea what that means, but I want a pair.
I would love to see pictures of Edward in these kind of clothing. Like,
yeah.
Compared to what he wears now, I mean, royal fashion icon.
And I'd like to see Will take a leaf out of his book.
It had been hinted at the time, so in the 90s, that Edward had developed what they describe as a touching friendship with the actor Michael Ball. A rumour that apparently thoroughly upset Edward.
Did the rumour include what he was touching?
But like, aside from the question of whether Edward is gay or like whether he's not straight and maybe somewhere else on the spectrum, it's very telling, I think, how he responded to the speculation about his sexuality.
Yeah, I think that tells us like way more about him and the royal family. So
Then his blousy style jackets and carefully cut jeans.
yeah, exactly. So at the New York premiere of Aspects of Love in 1990, this was an Andrew Lloyd Webber project, a journalist straight out asked him, "Are you gay?" And he responded, "It's just outrageous to suggest that sort of thing. It's so unfair to me and my family. How would you feel if someone said you were gay? The rumours are preposterous. I'm not gay, but what can I do about it? Why do certain people try to make more of things? I can only repeat, it's very unfair. The press has to be a lot more responsible. I wish I could be left to enjoy the theatre. I love it." Like, weird end, this like monologue about how much he loves the theatre. But really at the heart of this is some disturbing homophobia.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff is really rooted in homophobia, and I feel like it would be so disappointing to hear from your friend Edward, because it also pointed out in the book that he has a number of friends who are gay, and to hear someone that you're close to saying with disgust, "How would you feel if someone said you were gay?" It really indicates the disdain he has for gay people, and I think that itself gives you some insight into how the royal family more broadly would feel about LGBT people, and you know, really underscores that Princess Diana seemed to be an outlier where this was concerned. And you know, this was 1990, this was the middle of the AIDS crisis. How disgraceful to have a member of the royal family expressing views like this to a member of the press.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I just think, you know, Edward's the youngest of these four kids. He's looking up at his older brothers and sister growing up, his family. Like, these ideas that it's a bad thing to be called gay, they come from somewhere, and it most likely is to come from your family.
Yeah, and he was 26 at this time. But once he addressed it then, once he said that to a journalist, the Mirror ran it on the front page the next day, and then it was basically a free-for-all, and the papers could go ahead and report on all the rumours about his sexuality. They also include a quote from Edward's former girlfriend, Romy Adlington, who says of Edward, "Nothing is further from the truth. He's a real man. He's heterosexual and very manly."
Such a crazy thing to say. Oh my god, it's so dated.
And just like, again, really disappointing to hear. But I thought it was funny then that the authors also felt the need to point out that Edward was certainly no virgin where women are concerned when he met Sophie.
Which is like both a really clumsy phrase and also like possibly that they're hinting at something else. But seeing as we're talking about Sophie, her reaction to these rumours is also, I think, really bad.
Awful. As for Sophie, she is incandescent with rage at the mere suggestion.
Jesus Christ. So her friend, according to this book, asked her how Edward reacted to the accusations, and she quickly became angry and said, "It doesn't bother him too much, but it bothers me." I mean, I don't agree with that. It seems to bother him quite a lot as well.
Yeah. In any case, it does give you some insight into these like flashes of anger that he seems to have, and that he is quite temperamental. Whether it's with the press or with his own staff.
Yeah, I mean, temperamental sounds like quite a kind way of putting it. I kind of got the feeling he was, well, certainly pompous. That was probably the most often used word to describe him, I felt.
Yeah.
That he's basically this pompous and entitled nightmare. We got more information on that from Not in Front of the Corgis, that book by Brian Hoey that we were talking about last week. So, according to that, Prince Edward is considered by the household to be the most pompous member of the British royal family, insisting on absolute formality at all times. The most pompous member of a family that includes Prince Andrew.
I know, pretty wild. And Charles.
Yeah.
Who we have heard a lot about, his insistence on formality.
Clearly he learnt from his older brothers and built upon it.
Edward once reprimanded a butler because the butler didn't come out in time to open the car door for him, and he had to open the car door himself, which is really wild.
Well, they hadn't had Meghan yet to show them that they could do it themselves.
He also instructs his chauffeur to face the front at all times, even when the car is stationary, and says the same to his personal protection officers. Fucking asshole.
What's he doing in the back? He doesn't want them to see. I don't know.
And he had his officers given instruction by the royal suppliers of umbrellas, Swain, Aidney, Brigg and Son, in how to correctly furl an umbrella.
I mean, for fuck's sake.
Who gives a shit?
Edward does. But he also believes that he is in the vanguard of breaking down social barriers around the royal family. He once told the Radio Times that we are forever being told we have a rigid class structure. That's a load of codswallop.
Codswallop, oh my goodness.
Which, yeah, insane word. But to say this after he's, like, built a career, if you can call it that, on privilege, which is handed to him specifically because of where he was born or who he was born as.
It's so funny to imagine a royal today making a comment about class structure in this kind of way. I wonder, maybe are they a little bit more self-aware now? But I found all the stuff about his relationship with journalists particularly illuminating, given all the conversation we've heard recently about Prince Harry's relationship with the press. And, you know, people saying that Harry is very rude and very surly with the press. Edward sounds like he was incredibly rude to journalists. They give a few examples in the book, but the most famous example was the It's a Royal Knockout debacle in 1987, which was a game show which featured like royal team captains, Edward and Anne Andrew, and then a bunch of celebrities like John Travolta and Anthony Andrews and a few others. And Edward refused to allow journalists access to the filming, so they just had to hang around all day. And afterwards, when filming was finished up, Edward shows up at the press tent and finds all the reporters really pissed off. They've been waiting around all day, got no copy, they missed their deadlines, and now he's there waiting for them to tell him how brilliant he is.
It's like a perfect royal combination of like entitled rudeness and stupidity. Like just a total like not understanding about deadlines or like how the business of press works, like how stories get told, basically.
Especially as someone who works in media. But
works is probably being a bit strong.
Well, somebody who owned a TV production company. Yeah. So he gives a really boring speech to the press and ends by saying, "I hope you've enjoyed yourselves, have you?" And is greeted by like deafening silence, and then to which he takes great umbrage and says sarcastically, "Well, thanks for being so bloody enthusiastic. What have you been doing here all day?" Then one of the journalists says, "You might well ask." And he turns around to her and says, "Oh, really?" And thinks that she's being serious. And then they all start laughing because he's so stupid that he doesn't realise that they're all
taking the piss out of him.
Yeah. So he storms out and throws out like a sarcastic thanks. And then later, as he's eventually leaving, he tells press photographers, "One of these days, you people are going to have to learn some manners." Coming from this guy.
Yeah, fucking hell.
He needs to learn some manners. So obviously the headlines the next day are all, "It's a walkout," because he stormed out. And the Daily Mail report includes the line that journalists hadn't hung around all day for the privilege of being sneered at by a rudely offensive young man.
This is crazy. I mean, the authors of this book point out just how much damage this sorry affair did to the royal family is impossible to quantify, but dignity is a commodity that once lost is difficult to restore. I mean, the only reason that you would do, as a member of the royal family, do some kind of game show on TV is to appear like game for a laugh and like kind of a good sport. And then this kind of behaviour just undermines that entirely. It makes the whole thing pointless.
And he obviously realised that when the headlines the next day were all about him storming out rather than the show. But
we've had so much and they haven't even met.
So, how did they meet, Tom? Tell us this great romantic tale of the meet cute of Prince Edward and Sophie Rhys-Jones.
Well, we know Edward loves organising these events. So he was organising the Prince Edward Summer Challenge. This was in 1993. And this was basically like an offshoot of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And the idea was that loads of people would choose a challenge and it would be covered by local radio and it would be a big project, but it wasn't that appealing for some reason. Prince Edward wasn't the charismatic leader of this enterprise that they thought he would be, but he had chosen for his own challenge Bearing in mind he could do anything to raise... This is about raising the profile of this scheme. So he could have, like, I think the authors say, like, he could have streaked naked down the street or something, like, all these exciting things, which obviously he wouldn't do.
Very exciting, all right.
He could do something a bit more exciting than what he chose, which was a real tennis endurance challenge. Now,
real tennis, what the hell's that?
real tennis, now the word real in this instance comes from the word royal. And this was a game that was played famously by Henry VIII. And it's tennis, but it's indoors. It's played in like a special court which has walls at like different angles and stuff. And it's a bit more like squash even than tennis. But all the rules, as far as I could tell, seem to be in French. And very few people play it, not only because it sounds like batshit crazy, but also because there's very few of these specialist courts. Like, it's not a court you can use for anything else. You know, you can't play football, like five-a-side football on it when it's not being used. I love five-a-side football. I've never played five-a-side football in my life.
They also use solid balls, though. Not tennis balls.
Yeah, like the hand gesture you do for solid balls there.
Stop!
But yeah, so he was going to play real tennis for as long as he possibly could. And Sue Barker was going to be there.
Who's that?
She was a British tennis player who then went into sports commentating, I think. And the idea was that she was going to do a photo op with Edward where they take loads of photos, each one with her wearing a different sweatshirt with the name of a different local radio. She didn't turn up because Sky said that she could only wear stuff that said Sky on it. So suddenly, they needed a pretty face to fill this gap.
Who could fit the bill?
Luckily, the PR firm that they were using was the one that Sophie worked at. Apparently, Sophie was delighted to go, although she never gave any indication, even at this early stage, that she thought Edward was a hunk, or that she fancied him in any way. Nobody at the photo call noticed any electricity between the two. There's quite a few people who said they did not see any sparks fly at all.
It's pretty final, isn't it? Like, pretty gloomy.
But he really kept with this theme, and their first, like, proper date after this whole event was over was also playing real tennis.
Oh my god.
And you could tell he was serious about the romance because he told her to call him Edward, not Sir.
Can you imagine going on a date with someone and them saying, it's okay, you don't have to call me Sir?
It's a bit Christian Grey, though, don't you think?
Jesus Christ.
The mister.
They've got a quote from one of Sophie's friends who recalls Edward being arrogant and overbearing, but when he's with Sophie, he becomes good fun. Show me the evidence.
Yeah.
Their later dates then included trips to the cinema and the theatre, their shared passion, where they went to see Phantom of the Opera.
Joseph Bouquet, hold your tongue.
Even though they'd both already seen it more than once. They also would stay in and cook together.
There's this pretty, again, dated and horrific line that said, Sophie was particularly adept at quick and easy after-work meals like pasta and rice dishes, which single women are used to preparing for a night in front of the telly. The idea of, like, writing something and printing that now is just wild.
Anyway, they would cook and then watch EastEnders together.
I am making everyone's favourite sausage surprise.
This is kind of worlds away from Harry and Meghan at Soho House.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Edward invites Sophie to Windsor Castle. He tells her not to worry, though, because the Queen's not going to be there. But the day before, he says, oh, actually, we are going to have lunch with the Queen and Prince Philip, which is apparently something royals do regularly so that they can prevent their partners from spending the whole week worrying or whatever. But in the end, the lunch was fine.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the Queen and Philip. Like, Anne and Tim Lawrence, her second husband, were there at the same time. Apparently, at one point, the Queen got up and went to the window to watch the Concorde fly past, and that meant that everyone had to get up and follow her to the window because she saw a plane. Apparently, after meeting her, the Queen is reported to have said, you wouldn't notice her in a crowd.
Oh my god.
I mean,
This is meant to be some kind of compliment.
apparently so, because of all the stuff around Diana and Fergie.
This detail to me was shocking, that Sandringham, apparently, has what's called a weighing bucket at the front door because Edward VII wanted to know how much weight his guests put on during their stay.
Yeah, so when Edward had Sophie to stay there, she had to be weighed in front of him.
This is just crazy to me because there are, like, they say, oh, it was a giggle though. Probably not, because they also talk a few times in this book, and we also heard in a few other books, that Sophie has struggled with her weight, as lots of women do. So I can imagine that this would, I mean, to me, this would be probably the most mortifying thing you could do with your date.
Yeah, your, like, new boyfriend. But obviously, they're in the early throes of romance. And there must have been some pretty spectacular gifts you would get from a prince when you start going out, right?
How about this, Tom? A suitcase. Not just any suitcase. It's got your initials on it. So it's what Edward gave Sophie for her 29th birthday. He wasn't fond of giving her jewellery until the wedding day, which we'll get on to.
Oh, God.
But the closest came when Sophie was seen wearing a brooch in the shape of a teddy bear that the papers reported as being a diamond-encrusted brooch that cost £12,000. But then it turned out that actually it was just a present that a child had given Sophie at a charity event. But obviously they were like, teddy bear, that's Edward.
Oh, it's a coded message, a reference to their bedroom. Speaking of the bedroom, on all of the times when Sophie went to stay in royal residences with Edward, she slept in a separate bedroom.
On another note, they mentioned that one of her close friends said that her greatest fear for Sophie is that she's becoming bland. And,
I mean, that was a well-founded fear because we did have more than one person contact us asking us not to do an episode on Sophie. She's so boring. But anyway, the relationship they kept on the down low for a long time until it was revealed later by Andrew Morton, who obviously was behind the Diana tell-all book. When he broke the news that they were seeing each other, one of the pieces of evidence he had was that he had counted Sophie out from her flat but had not counted her back in, which meant that she had spent the night at Buckingham Palace. And they have this line in the book which I loved. The implication that theirs was already a sexual relationship was quite clear, and if nothing else, it gave Edward some heterosexual street cred to think that he did not spend every night cuddling his teddy bear. Okay, 1, love heterosexual street cred.
love it.
What a great phrase. But also, I think Edward is proof that you can spend every night cuddling your teddy bear as well as having sex. So, those things happen in the same room.
Much like we saw with Prince Harry and Meghan, Edward wrote a letter to the press about their scrutiny of Sophie, in which he said, "I'm very conscious that other members of my family have been subjected to similar attention, and it has not been at all beneficial to their relationships," which he had kind of intended to be sarcastic, but they stripped all that out. But the people that were reading it were like, oh, really? Like, you say, Edward?
But he kind of kept up this hostility towards the press, and he really hated anyone taking pictures of them and things. He went absolutely mad when press got hold of these paparazzi shots of them kissing while flying a yellow kite near Balmoral. He went so far as... No, let's just say these photos of them, like, I think Sophie's falling over in one of them, and in another one they are sharing a kiss. But he was so annoyed, he made a complaint to the Press Complaints Commission, who upheld it, and the papers apologised pretty half-heartedly, apart from The Sun, who called him a pompous, petulant and precious prig. But after that happened, he did realise that he'd blown this all out of proportion and withdrew the complaint. To try and manage some of this damage, he invited all of the Fleet Street newspaper editors to Buckingham Palace to discuss press intrusion, but only 2 of them went.
This just tells you, the relationship between the royals and the press has been fraught for years and years and years. In particular with Edward, a bone of contention was when he was going to get married. And Edward didn't want to give anyone the impression that he'd been pushed in to doing anything by the press. So by the end of a New Year's stay in 1993, Edward and Sophie came to the understanding that they were unofficially engaged, but no one could know about it. Which is just like not the romantic proposal story that you want.
I'm going to marry a prince. How did he propose? Well, he told me not to tell anyone, and it was like in his mum's house.
We had like an unofficial understanding that it was going to happen. And then 2 years later, he was interviewed by the Radio Times and asked about his intentions, and Edward snapped. If you shut up, mind your own business, and let me do it when I want, it's much more likely to happen.
So
Brat!
Fucking hell, yeah.
Can you imagine, like, Will or Harry talking like this?
No, I mean, like you said, you know, Harry is branded as being rude to the press when he just says things like, thanks for coming even though you weren't invited, which is making a statement, but it's not this kind of bratty whining.
Shut up and mind your own business.
Yeah.
So there were reports that Sophie and Edward's relationship had hit a rocky patch in 1994. To counteract this, they decided to take a 4-day break on the Royal Yacht Britannia to show the world that they were a loving and serious couple.
Nothing says serious like deciding to learn to windsurf and water ski in front of loads of cameras.
This story to me is just like, I cringe with secondhand embarrassment, but it's also absolutely hilarious. So Sophie thinks, okay, if we go windsurfing, we're going to get great photos of me just gliding across the water like a goddess. And instead, according to the book, she treated the press to a sequence of daily pratfalls.
At one point, she fell into the water. The rope was like whisked away, and she was stranded and had to be rescued by a dinghy full of photographers. Like, a dinghy full of photographers when you're just in the water, like looking like a drowned rat.
Like gasping for a breath. But Sophie was a bit pissed off that she didn't get the glam water skiing photos.
Yeah, she showed off what the book describes as her tetchy side. And the reporters asked, are you having fun? And she said, we are not. Brutal. That sounds like an Edward response.
So anyway, years and years are going by, and they're still not getting married. The book's authors give a little bit of an explanation for this long wait, which was very amusing to me. They just didn't have the opportunity. What it comes down to is that the crumbling of Charles and Andrew's marriages left them in an impossible position. And then Diana died. And what were they meant to do?
Get married? No way.
As well as this, Edward and Sophie wanted to be sure that their love was not used to bribe the nation to like the royals. They do not want to be acclaimed as the saviours of the royal family. It's a suggestion that makes their blood boil with anger.
The idea, I mean, I guess we've seen it recently that, like we were saying, that Sophie is meant to be the future of the monarchy and stuff, but like they clearly think that they are the saviours and that they just can't possibly have that burden thrust on them. Who is genuinely thinking that these people are the saviours of the monarchy?
It's certainly being shoved down our throats regularly enough that these two are going to be the next Harry and Meghan. Just a patently ridiculous claim. But anyway, eventually then, 1998, they go to Bermuda. Edward surprises her with a proposal in a romantic villa. So, tick box. We got the proposal. And the engagement ended up being the best news for the royal family for years. Until
1999.
Shortly before the wedding, a topless picture of Sophie is published on the front page of The Sun. This picture, which is reprehensible, disgusting, you should never do something like this. Apparently it was taken during a roadshow trip to Spain, and it shows Sophie with Chris Tarrant, the British broadcaster and host of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, for anybody watching Quiz. They are laughing together as they sit in the back of a car. Sophie is smiling and leaning against Chris Tarrant, who is lifting up her bikini top to reveal her nipple.
It was taken by a radio host, a woman who reportedly sold it, the photo, for £100,000.
But it immediately sparked numerous complaints. The radio host lost her job. The palace released a statement calling the front page a gross invasion of privacy that cannot be regarded as in the public interest. And then Chris Tarrant went and made a statement on his radio show. He said, "Leave Sophie alone. Stop trying to dig dirt up because you won't find any. Edward and Sophie are getting married. They're a happy young couple in love. They haven't done any harm to anybody and there are no skeletons in the cupboard. Stop trying to destroy them before they've started their life together. Haven't you learned anything from the death of Princess Diana?"
The then editor of The Sun, David Yelland, printed a really insincere apology for it on the front page the day afterwards. He said, "We clearly upset Miss Rhys-Jones. I have therefore decided to apologise to her and to the palace. No more pictures of Miss Rhys-Jones will appear in the paper. I wish her and Prince Edward the very best, although I don't expect to be invited to the wedding."
This is just such a shitty thing to happen to you right before your wedding when you're so excited. It's such a violation and such an example of the extremely sexist tabloid culture of the late 90s. Not that it's changed all that much, but let's get on to the wedding.
Yeah, let's talk about this outfit.
Just one of the worst royal wedding dresses and tiaras. Definitely the worst tiara, I think. This got a lot of buzz around it because it was a new piece, specially designed, like a mashup of 4 antique pieces of jewellery that were all put together into this tiara, which to me just looks like something from Claire's Accessories. Even worse, though, than the tiara was this horrible necklace, a cross pendant and matching earrings made with black and white pearls designed by Edward. Stick to your day job, man.
Absolutely. And I mean, okay, I understand that these are pearls, but they just look like plastic beads when they're in that like white and black. It looked so cheap.
What man thinks that kind of jewellery will look good with a wedding gown?
Yeah.
Just awful.
I want to talk about the wizard sleeves on, on this fucking dress.
This V-neck dress, really a dress underneath a sort of coat dress overlay, really stood out to me because of the fit. We heard so much about the fit of Meghan Markle's dress on her wedding day. If you want to talk about fit issues, look at this thing.
The sleeves are too long? Too wide? What's going on?
I also was taken aback by the little bridal party, the kids in their weird little Tudor costumes. Like, so it's outside Windsor Chapel where Henry VIII is buried.
Yeah, it's very much like we're here on a day out, not we're here for the royal wedding, which we're part of.
The wedding was at a weird time as well, 5 p.m. I thought that was a bit weird. And guests were told not to wear hats in respect of the daytime time of it. But the Queen said fuck it and wore a hat anyway. I found this great royal fan blog, like an Angel Fire blog called Windsor Street, which has Peter Gabriel music, which is Prince Edward's favourite artist, which plays as you go on the blog. It's brilliant. But anyway, they love Edward and Sophie, and they wrote about the wedding, and they said 2 things during the wedding were small causes for alarm, and both had to do with the rings. The first was the problems Edward had in getting the ring on Sophie's finger. For a few scary seconds, it looked like he was going to be unable to get it over her knuckle, but he eventually did, and the couple came up smiling. Phew. The second was when Sophie put Edward's ring on his pinky instead of his ring finger. There was a lot of talk over that at first, but a royal aide pointed out that it is perfectly normal for a prince to wear rings on his pinky and a big deal shouldn't be made out of it. Edward just wanted to do what was comfortable, it would seem, and since he was already wearing his signet ring on that finger, this makes sense.
It doesn't make sense if he's already wearing a ring on that finger. Unless she designed it as a sort of stacking ring arrangement, which she didn't.
It's just so funny to me, like imagining the kind of slapstick of like trying to get the ring over the knuckle, and then she's just like blindly jabbing it on the pinky ring.
Or whatever.
Surprising to me is that there was no wedding kiss at all. And according to this fan blog, the highlight of the ceremony was when Edward winked at Sophie.
Is that sexy or is that creepy?
That's as good as it gets with these two, apparently. Also on a note about titles, fans were delighted that Edward's initials, Edward, Anthony, Richard, Louis, spell out the word Earl. Brilliant.
The Earl.
He had apparently picked up on the title Earl of Wessex while watching Shakespeare in Love. the film, in which Colin Firth plays a character with that name, which is great. Great inspiration there. He just loves drama. After the deaths of the Queen and Prince Philip, though, Edward and Sophie will become the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. It's kind of interesting.
That'll be weird, I guess. Like, I just always associate that with Philip.
Katie Nicholl reported in Vanity Fair in 2011 that Sophie had actually wanted to be known as Princess Sophie, but the Queen wouldn't allow that title, so she gave her the Countess of Wessex instead. But I thought that was really interesting that she wanted to be Princess Sophie.
Yeah. It kind of really chimes with what we read in Not in Front of the Corgis, which said that staff are wary when dealing with Sophie as she can become rather aware of her position, forgetting that she is only royal by marriage, not birth.
This idea of like a grown woman who's like, I want to be called Princess Sophie. Get a grip. Speaking of names, Sophie calls the Queen Mama.
Not the mama.
Not the mama?
Not the mama, but in Sophie's case, the mama.
Mama.
Also, their home, which we talked about before, Bagshot Park, is at least 3 times bigger than Charles's home in Highgrove.
Really wasn't expecting them to have a bigger place than Charles.
I guess Charles has a few places, though.
I suppose.
But anyway, back to 1999. So after the wedding, later that year, Sophie goes to the Frankfurt Motor Show with her PR firm and poses beside a Rover 75 for publicity pics, while her PR firm is benefiting from a £250,000 contract from the same car maker, which caused a lot of concern, allegedly, with Buckingham Palace. Sunday Times had a headline, Palace orders Sophie choose duty or job.
I mean, this is basically Spawn, right?
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Edward, though, has also been accused of using his family ties to further his business with the television production company that he started, Arden Productions, and he tried to make royal-themed TV programs, like he did one on the Duke of Windsor, and he tried to do one on Prince William.
He never made one about the maid who was infatuated with the prince.
But let's get on to the big Sophie scandal. This was 2001.
The fake sheikh, who was an undercover journalist with now defunct Tabloid News of the World, posed as a potential client for Sophie's PR firm that she'd set up called RJH. She ran it with her partner Murray Harkin, and RJH stands for Rhys Jones Harkin. But what is weird is that the fake sheikh had already been reported on in the British press, but apparently these people who work in public relations weren't reading the papers closely enough, so they got duped by this hoaxer, basically. Quite similar to Harry, actually.
And the fake sheikh also got Fergie at one point as well. But anyway, so it was supposed to just be the sheikh and Murray Harkin. So he was reportedly very surprised when Sophie showed up. She was 36 at the time. And her personal protection officer. Both of them arrived for this meeting at the Dorchester Hotel in London, although her PPO stayed in another room. And the 3 of them had champagne. And as they were sipping the champagne, the room was bugged with microphones and cameras. So the conversation was being allegedly recorded on audio and video, which were later called the Sophie Tapes.
We're not able to listen to them, but according to the Mail on Sunday and the Telegraph, Sophie gave some political commentary. She condemned Tony Blair, calling him President Blair, and said that he was ignorant of the countryside and his wife is even worse.
Yeah, presidential is negative here, even though in America it's
Oh, yeah.
positive. And she reportedly dismissed the election chances of William Hague, who was then leader of the Conservative Party. He is now a board member on Will and Kate's Royal Foundation. And Sophie said, I don't think the general public like him much. He's got this awful kind of way he talks, doing an impression of Hague. He sounds like a puppet. And she allegedly said of Charles and Camilla, the Prince of Wales and Camilla were possibly number 1 on people's unpopular people list. I don't think a lot of people would want Camilla to be queen because of the history of the whole process. Not untrue.
How to make friends with your in-laws, though. My God. She also apparently referred to the Queen as the old dear.
And allegedly complained of the comparisons she was receiving to Diana. She said, when we got engaged, the public were very, very keen to put me on the empty pedestal that had been left by Diana. I don't think I could have coped with that level of pressure expectation. She goes on to get a little bit more catty then. You still get fanatical Diana diehards, but a lot came out after her death about the way she behaved.
Oh my god.
Not very nice, is it?
No, well, I mean, I don't think a lot of people in the royal family were very nice about Diana. But they were smart enough not to get caught on camera. So she reportedly also said that clients may gain additional profile from my situation, saying that it's an unspoken benefit.
Yeah, and then Murray Harkin went a bit further and allegedly implied that by hiring their firm, the sheikh would be basically buying royal patronage. He allegedly said, you can buy photos of her meeting the Queen and you can do whatever you like with those. So in that sense, you get endorsement from it. You recognise that by taking her company that it's going to have an impact. And then at another meeting, which was just Murray Harkin and the fake sheikh, Sophie wasn't there, he was asked about the speculation around Prince Edward's sexuality, and he said, there have been rumours for years about Edward. I'm a great believer that there's no smoke without fire.
Can you imagine how pissed Sophie must have been by that, given what we know about her reaction to these rumours?
He also reportedly said that he could arrange what the Mail on Sunday called a homosexual party for the sheikh and discussed using cocaine and ecstasy. It was all very embarrassing.
There's a whole lot here that the royal family don't like to be associated with.
And shortly after, Buckingham Palace receives a call from the News of the World revealing that the paper is planning to run an article claiming Sophie had made inappropriate remarks about public figures, including Tony Blair and William Hague. And they go to the Press Complaints Commission, who suggest a deal between the palace and the paper. So if the News of the World agreed not to print the article and surrendered the video and audio tapes with an undertaking that no copies were made, then Sophie would give an exclusive interview to the News of the World. However, while these negotiations were ongoing, Sophie decided to try and make amends by apparently sending handwritten letters of apology to people she had discussed, including Prince Charles, Tony Blair and William Hague.
She did end up giving this interview to the News of the World where she spoke very freely about fertility and the possibility of IVF and rumours about Edward's sexuality. Apparently this was information she volunteered unprompted and not in response to a question. But the palace were allowed to choose the interviewer, and they chose a journalist who was friendly with Sophie, and they'd been granted headline and copy approval. And the headline that apparently they approved was Sophie, my Edward's not gay.
Not in caps as well. And then another headline, because this was spread across 4 pages, was, I would like to sing it from the rooftops. There's nothing sham about our marriage. The Guardian quotes a source at the publisher of News of the World who said the Palace Communication Secretary had no issue with the headlines. They said 1 or 2 minor things were amended. That was all they asked for. It was staggering. I actually find this hard to believe. I cannot imagine that they would allow it to run with Sophie, my Edward's not gay.
Yeah.
But anyway, she also complained a bit more about the comparisons to Diana, saying she'd been getting compared to her since she was 15 years old, when Diana was 19 years old. Though she also said, I don't deny that we do look alike, but I could never compete with Diana's image.
Yeah, so she was kind of trying to do a nicer version of what she'd already said.
I mean, her hair was very similar to Diana's, and they did look maybe a little bit alike in that they're both white women with blue eyes.
Yeah. So, despite making this deal with News of the World, the Mail on Sunday managed to get details of the tapes and published its own story with all the quotes that we just discussed. And they reported that Prince Charles was deeply offended, and the Queen and Prince Philip were said to be utterly despairing because of her intrusion into politics, her comments about Tony Blair and William Hague. They were also infuriated that Sophie had written letters of apology, which thereby brought her remarks to the attention of those who might otherwise have remained ignorant of them.
A senior courtier told the Mail on Sunday that the remarks went way beyond a gaffe. This is a severe embarrassment for the whole royal family. She has broken the golden rule. She has been indiscreet. She has gone into politics. And some of Sophie's friends worried that the scandal would also put her marriage to Prince Edward at risk. They said, none of us knows how Edward will react, but we know where his first loyalty will lie, the royal family, and he's absolutely furious with her. That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you imagine your husband? His first loyalty will not lie with you.
The palace then followed up with a statement. They said, Remarks attributed to the Countess about political figures are selective, distorted, and in several cases flatly untrue. Not one of the quotes cited by the Mail on Sunday is accurate.
Which that just makes me wonder, like, what was she apologising then? Why did she write these handwritten letters of apology to Charles and Tony Blair and William Hague if she had nothing to apologise for?
Such a stupid thing to do. Like, clearly they never discussed a strategy around this where they would say, okay, we'll just say that you never said it. We'll say that it's all made up. She just went straight ahead and created the
Whipped out her
proof.
pen and pad.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, to read this. Like, at the time, the Mail on Sunday's reports wondered whether Sophie would ever recover from the humiliation. And, like, reading this now, like, nobody ever talks about this. People are always like, Sophie never puts a foot wrong. She's getting the, like, perfect royal treatment.
Yeah.
Anyway, the News of the World went on to publish the full transcripts of their conversation across 10 pages. I liked that The Guardian then talked to a Labour MP who said there's simply no need for new Labour modernisers to campaign to downsize the monarchy when the royal family is doing so much itself to promote its own destruction. The Observer reported that Buckingham Palace was actually angry with Downing Street and that senior royal aides had accused ministers of deliberately fanning the flames of the affair in order to keep the story in the public agenda so the government could use it to bring forward the issue of monarchy reform, or so the palace was said to believe.
Do you feel like there was more conversation around this as being like the downfall of the monarchy than there has been around Prince Andrew?
I don't know. I don't think we could ever really think about that because people were like watching TV and listening to the radio news a lot more back then. So perhaps it was wall-to-wall coverage.
Yeah.
If you are somebody who was around in 2001 and can remember this story, please let us know what it was like. I think as well, though, with Andrew, that has been going on for so many years, whereas this like breaking at once would be so shocking. But as all of this was breaking, Sophie and Edward were actually on a royal tour. They went on a 4-day tour of Bahrain and Qatar to promote British trade. And according to the Telegraph, Sophie appeared under strain when the cameras weren't flashing. There was an air of isolation about her. And some of the people they met, such as the Prime Minister, met privately with Edward. So Sophie had to sit outside on a sofa alone.
God, what a depressing visual.
Do you think, like, Camilla has to do that sometimes?
I think whenever she can.
Sophie and Edward also cancelled one of their engagements and a TV interview and then went and scrapped plans to allow 2 British journalists to travel on the plane with them.
Shut that shit down.
The Mail also accused Sophie of copying Princess Diana's style. So they made a visit to a mosque in Bahrain and she wore the same colour of headscarf, white, rather than what you might expect, the like, plain black. And she did the same pose for the cameras that Diana had done in Cairo in 1992. So it seemed like she was maybe courting the comparisons there.
Yeah. 3 days after this story broke, The Times reported that Edward had used taxpayer-funded trips to Malaysia and Brunei the year before to drum up business for his fucking TV production company. This was Ardent Productions, which was reportedly almost £2 million in debt.
Crazy.
So it's reported that on the 6-day official tour of Malaysia and Brunei, Edward arranged to do a programme on royal gardens that featured those of both the monarchs that he met with.
These two are shameless. Like, I wonder if this is what is in people's, like, in people in the royal household's minds when they think of what Harry and Meghan are going to do.
Yeah.
I don't think Harry and Meghan would be quite as tactless as these two. And also, Ardent Productions was a total failure. There's some really good pieces about, like, how badly managed it was. And it eventually folded in 2009. And according to company documents reported by The Telegraph, the company was left with assets of just £40 and 27p when it was liquidated. Prince Edward's big TV production company, and at the end of the day, £40 and 27p.
But that might be the only, like, legitimate money in the royal family.
I don't think you can even say that, though, because he's all nepotism and privilege.
Yeah.
And But yeah, and anyway, then Sophie ended up stepping down from her job and, you know, the rest, as they say, is history. And very boring history, because since then they've done very little of interest. Like, there obviously was the story of Sophie giving birth prematurely and all that stuff, which is very sad, and we're not going to get into that. But you know, they really have done very little to merit headlines in the 19 years since.
Clearly they learnt their lesson.
It's quite interesting, I think, that they obviously really said, we've got to shut this down, we've got to go like turbo boring.
Yeah.
And since then, just nothing. Although, now that we're hearing that they're the new Harry and Meghan, they'll be pushed back in the spotlight more. We're already seeing that a lot on social media, that they are really pushing images of them. Something to watch, maybe, to see how they take to their new time in the spotlight.
Yeah, and see if we get any of the old scandals stirred up, or if we maybe get some new ones.
Yeah, and I am honestly interested in, like, if you are a fan of Sophie and Edward and there's something that we have just totally missed, that you think we're being unfair on them, please let us know. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far with us, we hope you enjoyed it. I don't think that was boring, but...
Yeah, I have to say I was really pleasantly surprised.
I have to say, though, it did make me a lot more angry about how Edward just flies by under the radar now and is apparently really pompous and horrible to his staff.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all changed in the years since. If any biographers have any interest in writing another book about him, maybe I would read it. But anyway, thank you so much for listening, and we hope you come back and listen to our regular show.
If you like this episode, you can leave us a 5-star review and tell a friend.
You can find us on Facebook at Airheads and on Instagram and Twitter at AirheadsPod. And you can also email us your musings on Sophie and Edward at airheadspod@gmail.com. But otherwise, have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.
Blobby, blobby, blobby.